obviously. Stephanie Kelton, sorry about that. One of the things I wanted to raise, Bill, related to your discussion that you posed to your students. What do you think of the government deficit? Where do you want the government to be? I do exactly the same thing with my students in Kansas City. And I say, do you want the government to balance its budget? Or do you want it to run a deficit? And, you know, they have this in their mind. They think the responsible thing to do is to have the government run a federal budget surplus. And I say, okay, you realize what this means for you. And they don't. And I think this is one of the most effective ways that we can push back against this call for fiscal responsibility and governments to live within their means and balance their budgets, is to say that there are two sides to the ledger. And if the government takes the surplus position, guess which side you take? You take the deficit position. You are the non-government sector. And so by accounting logic, if the federal government is running a surplus, the non-government sector will be in deficit. It is no surprise today that while the federal government's deficit continues to rise and rise and rise, people are scratching their heads and looking at private saving rise and rise and rise, right? It's the other side of the ledger. So ask someone the next time they talk to you about fiscal responsibility, if you want the government to be in a surplus position, that's going to push you in the deficit position.
Pavlina Cherneva, just to elaborate on this very same point, it's the same thing with the debt. If you're going to look at the debt as the government liability, this is somebody else's asset. So all of this argument about the government being responsible and paying down its debt, just like households need to pay down their debts, just means that every single private sector portfolio is going to lose a very valuable, default risk-free asset. And so, once again, you have to look at both sides of the story. Now, there are other reasons that we can get into. Should the government be injecting all of these bonds in the market? For what purpose are they injected, etc.? But to the extent that they reside in your portfolios, if you want the government to reduce the debt, you will be losing that asset. Now, what you would be getting is another asset. You'll be getting cash. That is also a government liability. So you just take your pick. How would you like to save? In the form of reserves, dollar reserves, or in the form of bonds? With or without interest. Yeah.
Of course, if they run a surplus, you want them either one.
That's right.
You're losing. Randy wrote a blog for the blog that we run out of the Kansas City, out of the University of Missouri, Kansas City, and Randy did a blog on this point that Pavlina is talking about, and I liked this one very much because I hadn't seen it done by anybody else. But he said, you know, when you talk, you see the national debt clock, and we are hearing your share of the national debt. This is the amount that each of you owes. And he said, owes? It's not O-W-E, it's O-W-N. It is the assets that each of us, if we were to divide it equally, right, by population, it is the amount that we own. We don't owe. It's not our liability. We aren't responsible for paying back the national debt. It is our asset. It is what we own.